On a rainy night in the heart of America, the city stirred to the sound of something it could not explain. Shop alarms howled through empty streets, but when the first police units arrived, they found nothing that resembled an ordinary crime. A jewelry store stood in silence, its glass display removed with surgical precision, as though invisible hands had lifted it apart piece by piece. Inside, the valuables were gone, but what was left behind was far more disturbing. Strange masks, grotesque shapes assembled from scraps of metal and fabric. Symbols smeared in paint across the walls. The officers looked at each other in disbelief, realizing this was no ordinary robbery. Someone had staged a performance. Someone had left behind a message in the language of fear. Witnesses soon came forward, though their accounts only deepened the mystery. Some swore they had seen tall figures moving in unison, bodies covered in dark paint, faces hidden by monstrous masks. Others claimed the intruders moved like dancers, precise and synchronized, almost as if rehearsed. But when detectives reviewed the surveillance cameras, the footage was almost useless. Distorted images, blurred shapes, shadows that slipped just out of frame. What the cameras did capture looked less like criminals and more like creatures born from nightmares. As days turned into weeks, more robberies followed. Antique shops, private collections, small museums, each one struck with impossible efficiency. The targets were never random. Stolen items included rare mechanisms, fragments of industrial art, and historical artifacts no one outside of niche circles would even know about. Money was left untouched. Cash registers still full. What mattered to these thieves was something else entirely. Objects with meaning, objects that could be repurposed into something new. And every crime scene was marked by the same signature: installations of stolen fragments, twisted into monstrous sculptures, left like trophies mocking both the victims and the police. Detective Martin Hayes, a man hardened by decades on the force, found himself at the center of the case. He was meticulous, rational, never one to believe in the supernatural. Yet even he admitted to colleagues that the logic of these crimes eluded him. The thieves moved like ghosts, bypassing alarms without leaving a trace, escaping before officers could even close in. "They're not just stealing," Hayes said during a late-night briefing, "they're performing. This is theater, and we're the audience." Reporters swarmed the story, turning the monster gang into national headlines. One journalist, Lena Rivers, dug deeper than most. She uncovered connections between the stolen objects and old abandoned factories around the city. Some of the masks resembled industrial tools, others fragments of forgotten machines. Her articles painted a picture of criminals who were more like underground artists, reshaping crime into a macabre form of protest. "They aren't thieves," she wrote. "They're architects of fear." But fear was not the only thing they left behind. Police forensic teams discovered strange details. Industrial paint mixed with expensive pigments used only by professional artists. Mechanical components arranged into patterns resembling ancient symbols, and once, a crude letter scrawled in black ink. It bore no name, only a signature: the puppeteer. Detectives believed this figure to be the leader of the gang, the mastermind who choreographed every move, every grotesque creation, every haunting performance. The public, meanwhile, was divided. Some viewed the gang as a terrifying threat, a symbol of chaos tearing through American cities. Others whispered admiration, seeing them as dark artists rebelling against consumerism, mocking the greed of the wealthy by stealing from collectors and corporations. But admiration quickly turned to dread when the crimes escalated. The sculptures grew more elaborate, and then came the first death: an unfortunate security guard who crossed their path one night and never returned home. His body was found days later, positioned like part of one of their installations. It was then that the press stopped calling them pranksters or performance artists. Now, they were killers. Theories spread like wildfire. Some said the group was a cult, worshipping gods of decay and ruin. Others argued they were ex-theater actors or dancers turned criminals, using their stage training for precision strikes. The most far-fetched claimed they were not human at all, but creatures from nightmares given flesh. Yet the truth remained hidden, each clue dissolving into contradiction. Detective Hayes set a trap, determined to bring the nightmare to an end. Using a recovered mask as bait, he staged an undercover operation in an abandoned warehouse. The team waited, armed and prepared. And they came? The figures appeared in the night, moving as one, their monstrous faces reflecting the dim light. But instead of falling into the trap, they turned the scene into another performance. In front of armed officers, they rearranged stolen objects into a grotesque tableau, a sculpture that mocked the police with its symbolism. Then, in an impossible act of coordination, they vanished into smoke and shadows, leaving the officers with nothing but confusion and rage. The puppeteer had outplayed them again. Whispers spread through the underworld that this was more than a gang. It was a network. Each member had a role. One was the engineer, crafting silent tools and devices; another the artist, designing masks and installations; another the dancer, choreographing movements to avoid detection; and always, the unseen puppeteer, pulling every string. Their motives blended ideology with madness. An obsession with turning crime into art, with transforming horror into spectacle, with humiliating authority at every step. Arrests were eventually made. A few lower-ranked members were captured, broken by interrogation. But none would reveal the puppeteer's identity. None would betray the figure who turned them into legends. And so the true mastermind remained free, a ghost in the city, a shadow in the collective imagination. Even after the crimes slowed, the legend of the monster gang lived on. Some believe the puppeteer still walks among us, waiting for the next stage, the next performance. Others claim the installations left behind or unfinished works, part of a story not yet complete. The factory stood at the edge of the city, silent and hollow, its broken windows staring like empty eyes into the night. When the police forced the doors open, they expected dust, rust, and forgotten machines. Instead, they stepped into something that looked like a private gallery of nightmares. Masks were hung along the walls, each more grotesque than the last, faces stitched from fabric and metal, animalistic visages twisted into parodies of life. Sculptures stood in the corners, mannequins fused with scrap parts, doll heads welded onto iron rods. Broken clocks embedded into torsos that looked like they were frozen mid-scream. And on the floor, painted in thick black strokes, was a massive symbol. It resembled a spider's web, but with jagged, uneven lines that seemed to pulse with meaning none of the detectives could understand. At the center of the web stood the largest piece of all, a towering figure made of stolen costumes, industrial pipes, and shattered mannequins. Its arms stretched wide, as if welcoming the intruders into its stage. Detective Hayes stood silently, trying to understand. This wasn't just a hideout, it was an exhibition. Whoever built this wanted them to find it. And then came the note. It was pinned to the chest of the towering figure, written in the same hand as the letter they had found months earlier. 4 words only: the show goes on. The discovery in Philadelphia changed everything. Up until then, there had been whispers that the gang might be more spectacle than substance. But once human remains were woven into the installations, there was no longer any doubt. This was murder dressed as art. Meanwhile, journalist Lena Rivers pursued her own investigation. She had followed the trail from abandoned factories to underground art circles. She found hints of an old collective called the Ashen Mask. They were artists who believed true art had to provoke fear and disgust. Most disbanded years ago, but one member had insisted on anonymity. His peers had called him the puppeteer. Hayes and Lena's paths finally crossed when she published her findings. At first, their meeting was tense. He saw her as reckless, she saw him as stubborn, but they both wanted the same thing: to unmask the puppeteer. Together, they traced the symbols. Hayes brought his knowledge of evidence, Lena brought her understanding of art. Slowly, a picture emerged. Each scene mirrored a theme: birth, decay, transformation, death. The puppeteer was staging a narrative, and the final act had not yet been performed. Then came the video. Grainy, black and white, filled with static. A figure in a mask sat like a conductor before an invisible orchestra. A distorted voice spoke. "You call us monsters. You call us killers. But we are mirrors. We are what you made us. The city feeds on violence, on spectacle, on consumption, and we feed it back to you, purified, transformed. The show is not over. The final performance is near. And you are already part of it." The feed cut to static. Hayes knew then, the finale would not be hidden in some forgotten warehouse. It would happen in the open, with the entire country as witness. As midnight on New Year's Eve approached, Hayes realized where it would be: the old condemned stadium, burned years ago, still standing like a corpse in the city. Inside, the stadium was filled with mannequins dressed in stolen clothes, arranged like a silent crowd. On the stage, a towering puppet figure shuddered to life, pulled by hidden wires. And behind it, the puppeteer stepped forward, masked, draped in a cloak of rags, half man, half beast. Fireworks outside thundered through the broken roof as the puppeteer's distorted voice filled the arena. "You call us criminals. But we are mirrors. Every scream, every horror, is your reflection. We are the monsters you made. And now, you will watch the final act." The stage shook as explosives began to tick down. Hayes and Lena raced to disarm the wires. The puppeteer descended, blades hidden in his hands. Hayes fired, but the villain kept moving. They clashed in the center of the stage as the stadium roared with collapsing steel. Hayes ripped the mask away. Behind it was a pale, scarred face, smiling. "It was always all of us," the puppeteer whispered. The explosives detonated. Fire tore through the structure. The massive puppet collapsed. Mannequins burst into flames. Lena screamed Hayes' name as the stage split apart. For a heartbeat, Hayes saw the puppeteer's smile vanish into the blaze. Then the world came down. When Lena awoke outside, the stadium was rubble. Rescue teams swarmed. Hayes was gone. The puppeteer was gone. But in the weeks that followed, billboards glitched across cities, showing burning mannequins and whispering, "The next act begins soon." Panic spread. Authorities dismissed it. But Lena knew. The puppeteer had become more than a man. He was an idea. And ideas cannot be killed. Months later, an anonymous video surfaced. Grainy footage of an alley. A man limped past, arm bandaged, face scarred but unmistakable. Detective Hayes. And behind him, just for a moment, a masked figure followed silently. The puppeteer's story had not ended in the flames. It had only changed its stage. The show, it seemed, would never be over. Legends are not buried in ashes. They breathe in whispers, in shadows, in every corner where fear waits. The puppeteer may vanish, but his stage is everywhere and the show is far from over. If you enjoy dark and mysterious stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the puppeteer survived, or was it all part of the performance? Your theories keep the story alive. And remember, Every legend hides a little truth.